In this video, we'll look at categorical sentences, which are some sentences that are particularly important for describing relationships between objects. See, so far, when we've been symbolizing sentences like this one, some cities have more than 1 million people. What we've been doing is we've been relying on the fact that the universe of discourse consists only of cities. With categorical sentences, what we can do is we can symbolize the same sentence, but we can do it in universes of discourse that aren't restricted in the same way. So these are the four types of categorical sentences. They were described and named by logicians in the Middle Ages. So we'll go through each one of these. The simplest ones, the medieval logicians called I sentences. These take form like this. There is a coyote in my neighborhood. So what this says is there is an X such that X is a coyote and X is in my neighborhood. And we symbolize it like this, right? There is an X such that X is a coyote, X is in my neighborhood. Um, the example was originally there was a coyote in my river valley, or in the river valley, but then the pandemic hit and the coyotes just went and like moved in down the street from me. Okay. Some coyotes are in my neighborhood would be symbolized the same way. In the Middle Ages, actually, that was the way that they understood I sentences, was in terms of some rather than there is a. Um, Note that this is not equivalent to this, right? There is an X that is a coyote and there is an X that is in my neighborhood, because this says that it's the same thing, right? And this one here does not say that the same thing is both a coyote and in my neighborhood. Okay, the next type are called A sentences. Now, let me just clarify here that you don't need to memorize all these medieval names. What you need to know are the structures of the different types of categorical sentences and how to use them to symbolize English sentences. But as for the particular letters that stand for each one, you don't need to memorize those. Okay, A sentences have the form like this. Every iguana is green. Um, Now, like your first idea for how to try to symbolize this might be something like this for all x, ix, and gx. That's not going to work though, because what this says is it says that everything in the universe of discourse is an iguana and everything in the universe of discourse is green. And that's not what we want. What we want is actually this. If something in the universe of discourse is an iguana, then it is green. So you symbolize it as conditional. For all x, if x is an iguana, x is green. One important thing to note is that this conditional, it does not actually assert that any iguanas exist. And if you don't have any iguanas in the UD, then this is going to be vacuously true, right? It will be false for every x in the universe of discourse, which means that what you have here is a conditional with an antecedent that's always false, which means it's going to come out to be true. Um, this implication may seem odd to people, but the thing is that this is actually what you want, because there are A sentences that are true, but that definitely don't entail that the thing referred to in the antecedent exists, right? Like for an example, all fire-breathing dragons breathe fire, right? This is true. Fire-breathing dragons don't exist, which is probably a good thing. So this is an implication that you want. The important thing is this: for all x, ix implies gx does not entail there is an xix. Um, in a similar vein, very often what people think is that some will entail not all, right? So some coyotes live in my neighborhood implies not all coyotes live in my neighborhood. And the reason why they think this is that there are conversational situations where this is actually the way that we interpret some sentences, right? So, like for example, it's like the week after a midterm, right? And somebody asks an instructor, or how did the class do on the midterm? And the instructor says some students passed the midterm. The way that people will interpret this is as meaning not everybody passed the midterm. Um, that is not a matter of logical entailment, right? Some students pass the midterm does not logically entail not all the students pass the midterm. What you have here is a different phenomenon. It's a phenomenon called conversational implicature, which was first described by H.P. Grice. So what you have to think about here is not just the meaning of the sentences, but the way that they're used in that particular conversational context. Um, the idea is this, right? So in typical conversational contexts, we assume that a person who's speaking is giving us all of the relevant information. And the thing is that if you have a bunch of people in a class who are asking about how the class did on the midterm, the information that they really want to know is, how did they do, right? Did they in particular pass, right? I mean, this is what each student wants to know is, did I pass? Now, given that, if if everybody in the class passed, then this is really important, relevant information for the instructor to tell everybody, because that tells every student in the class what they want to know, which is whether you know, they in particular passed. So the important thing here is that the instructor didn't give this relevant information, right? The instructor gets asked about how everybody did on the midterm and did not say that everybody passed. And the fact that the instructor didn't give that information, that is taken to imply that it's not true, right? That this is the most plausible reason for why the instructor didn't say that everybody passed, um, is because it's not actually true that everybody passed, and that's why the instructor didn't say it, because it would not actually be a true statement. Um, so the important thing is, though, this is the thing, is that it's not the implication doesn't arise from the fact that the instructor said some students passed. The implication arises from what the instructor didn't say. It's from the fact that the instructor didn't say everybody passed. Um, I mean, suppose that, people where somebody just asked the instructor, right, so did everybody pass the midterm? And the instructor just sort of, like scratches their neck and then changes the subject. Here too, right? The implication is not everybody passed the midterm. But the thing you can see here, right, is that like scratching your neck and changing the subject, that does not entail not everybody in the class passed the midterm, right? Scratching your neck does not entail, it is not the case that for all X, P. Um, so I mean, so then what you can see, right, is that the this is something that arises in particular conversational contexts, but it's not a matter of logical entailment. So what you have is this: there is an XP does not logically entail not for all XP. Um, so you have to remember this for when you're doing symbolizations and things like that. Okay, let's go back to the categorical sentences. The next type are medieval logicians call these O sentences. These are for example, some coyotes are not friendly. Um, Actually, here's another example, right, of some not entailing not all. It's not just some coyotes are not friendly, that basically all of them are not friendly. There are two ways of symbolizing this, right? One of them is you can read this as saying that there is at least one X, such that X is a coyote and X is not friendly. So you get this symbolization. Another way of reading it is this: it's just saying that it is not true that all coyotes are friendly. So you take the all coyotes are friendly here and then just negate that. Either of those are perfectly fine symbolizations of a no sentence. An E sentence is a no sentence. So like no lemurs are green. Um, For the same reasons as with the A sentences, you can't symbolize this as for all x, Lx, and not Gx, right? What this says is everything in the universe of discourse is a lemur, and everything in the universe of discourse is not green. Instead, you have two possibilities here, right? One is if anything is a lemur, or for anything, if that thing is a lemur, then it's not green. Another possibility is you can say that you can take the possibility that there is a green lemur and then negate that. So here's a summary of the four forms, right? How you symbolize them, and then their, traditional medieval names that you don't really need to know. Um, Here are the relationships between them. So all P's are Q's denies some P's are not Q's, or there is a P that is not a Q. And no P's are Q's denies some P's are Q's, or there is a P that is a Q. And of course, vice versa in both cases. As for other relationships, so these two statements are both compatible. There is an X that is a P and a Q, and there is an X that is a P and not a Q. And then as we've already talked about this, right? So some P's are Q's does not entail not all P's are Q's. All P's are Q's does not entail some P's are Q's. And then what follows from this is that these two are actually compatible as well, right? They're compatible in the case where nothing in the universe of discourse is P. And then what you'll have is that both all P's are Q's and no P's are Q's will be true. So we'll finish this off by looking at how you would symbolize A sentences, the different ways that they can be expressed in English. So there are a lot of ways that that A sentences particularly are expressed, right? All, any, every, these are uh, all A sentences. Just the sort of general P's are Q's, right? Like rhinos are big. Um, Particular ones that you would need to watch for are things of this form. A P is a Q, the P is Q, right? A rhino is big, the rhino is big. Um, Here you have to look carefully at the context, right? So sometimes what these are meant in a general sort of way where what it means is an A sentence. It's talking generally about all rhinos. In other contexts, though, the rhino is big, it could actually be referring to a specific rhino. So you just have to look at the context and see which one of these is intended. For E sentences are very, very similar to A sentences. You have a variety of different ways that these can be done. You also have this general thing: a rhino is not a good pet, right? Or the rhino is not a good pet, right? Again, there you got to look, make sure that they're not referring to a specific rhino. And you've got these two alternative symbolizations for these, of course. Um, for I sentences, the primary ways that these would be symbolized, or in terms of, or the ways that these would be expressed in English, would be in terms of there is or some. They can be singular or plural. So you can have there is a smart bird, there are smart birds. We don't distinguish between these in PL, right? We just ignore plurality. So we would just symbolize these exactly the same way. And O sentences are going to be the same effectively as I sentences, right? Just done the same way in English, and then we're going to end up symbolizing them the same way in PL. There's one last sentence type we're going to look at, which is not traditionally considered to be a categorical sentence, but it behaves pretty much exactly like one. And this is only P's or Q's. So only P's or Q's is an A sentence with the subject and predicate terms reversed. So only P's or Q's means all Q's are P's. So for example, only iguanas are green means all green things in the universe of discourse are iguanas, right? If a thing in the universe of discourse is green, then it must be an iguana, right? Similarly, only birds can fly means all flying things are birds. And that's the same thing. If it can fly, it's got to be a bird.